And so, in the end, Stratton and or Kebble hire hitmen to kill a list of enemies. You know, it just in human terms, how do you go from being a slightly too sharp businessman to behaving like the mafia?
Well, the one version that we heard in court was the version that we heard from Mikey Schultz and Nigel McGurk and Cuppy Smith, the three shooters. And their version is about how Brett Kebble wanted to die and how he was complicit in his own murder and he was an active participant, and how he had decided that he was about to be charged, he was about to be arrested, all of this malfeasance was about to be made public, and he decided that he rather wanted out. And how these three shooters were hired to kill him. And we heard the story about how he had met them on this quiet street in an upmarket suburb in Johannesburg, about how the gun failed to go off twice, how the car overheated, how Brett Kebble literally drove to his own death and looked Mikey Schultz in the eye and begged him to kill him. And that's the version that we heard in court. Of course, if you speak to other people, the version is completely different, such as his father and his brother and his friend Dominic Nsele, who he spent the night, he was the last person to see him alive, really, besides the butler. And they said that there's no way that Brett Kebble would have been complicit in his own murder, and that he would have found a far more elegant way to do it than the way he did.
It is a very complicated way to end your life.
It is, and also it's very brutal.
Yes.
7 shots and on a quiet street, and there were many things that were picked up by forensic investigators that didn't seem to fit. But the version of the others who dispute the assisted suicide is that Brett Kebble was taken out, either because he was going to expose the other role players in the fraud, or because money was sitting offshore and other people had access to it and he didn't, and that's never been properly exposed. There were stories in the beginning of diamond deals gone wrong and of a possible hijacking or a political hit. Everyone still has an opinion about what they think actually happened.
And no definitive version?
No, there's no definitive version. Obviously the one that's told in the book is the one from the shooters, of the assisted suicide. But it's so widely disputed that it's hard to tell. And the court never made an outright finding on whether or not it was an assisted suicide or not. The court did, however, find that the version told by the shooters, they told a truthful version and an honest account. But it never made a definitive finding about whether or not it was an assisted suicide.
Brett Kebble seems to have some missing private secret in the book that's not quite explained. At one point, a police informer says he's gay. Whether he was or not, there was something in his secret, in his private life, that he seemed to want to keep secret. Do you have any sense of what that is?
I'm not entirely sure what it was. There was talk that he was gay. I didn't go into that extensively because I didn't think it was relevant, and whether he was or not. He's the father of 4 children. He was married at the time. The butler certainly alludes to that as well, the fact that he may have been gay, and there was always talk of rent boys and secrets and all sorts of things. But I certainly think that he kept his private and public life very separate, and people often spoke about how he didn't want his wife included in his business deals and that kind of thing. I think the person who holds the key to all of this is his wife, Ingrid, who's never spoken publicly. I spoke to her about 3 weeks ago to ask her again if she would do an interview, and it was a very difficult conversation for both of us. But I do think that she's never spoken. I wish that she would have trusted me with her story, because I think that her version is probably the most accurate one.
And the family, clearly Brett didn't get on with his brother and his father. What was the dynamic within the family?
Well, the dynamic was a very, very curious one. It was very interesting because both Roger and Guy, his father and brother, they're real men's men. Guy was a Springbok rugby player. His father, Roger, was he worked in a mining on a minefield. He was a shift boss, and they're both very rough around the edges. Whereas Brett was far more refined, and he had a taste for culture and for art and finer things. And I think that was the roots of the clash. But I spoke to Guy and to Roger about it for the purposes of writing the book, and they spoke about how it was Brett who distanced himself from them, and how they made,
Which again implies that he had something
Perhaps he did. Perhaps he.
That he didn't wish to share with them.
I think that other people I spoke to said that he simply felt as though they berated him and they belittled him, and he didn't want to be around them for that reason, and that's why he distanced himself.
And how did the investigation into Kebble's death blow open the corruption of Jackie Selebi and all the figures surrounding him?
Well, what happened was, as a result of the murder investigation, the Scorpions began investigating. They started what's called Operation Bad Guys.
Scorpions are the anti-corruption unit.
Which has now been dissolved. They no longer exist, and at the time they were an independent investigating unit that wasn't answerable to any political head. And they began investigating it, and that led them to the corrupt relationship between Glenn Agliotti and Jackie Selebi. It led them to an international drug smuggling network. It was an incredibly convoluted investigation, but as a result of it, we did have the National Police Commissioner convicted of corruption. We never had anyone convicted of Brett Kebble's murder, and we also we had plea bargain deals in the massive drug trial, which was R250 million worth of hashish. And there were these 3 separate trials that were all going on, but were all interlinked and were all as a result of Brett Kebble's murder.
And the drug trial related to which figures that we've talked about?
Well, what happened was the Scorpions leveraged complicity, so they realised that Glenn Agliotti and Clinton Nassif were involved in this drugs trial. And they went to them and said, we'll give you a lesser sentence in this drugs trial if you agree to testify for us against Jackie Selebi. And that's how they leveraged complicity. So the drugs trial was the first domino to fall. And as a result of that, they managed to get Agliotti and Nassif on board to testify against Selebi.
But how did the murder trial collapse? Because it failed to bring back a verdict, didn't it?
It completely just imploded, the murder trial. And that was largely because the prosecuting team that had structured all of these plea bargain arrangements with the shooters was taken off the case at the last minute. And that was largely a politically motivated move.
Yes. And who had motivated that move?
The National Director of Public Prosecutions, Menti Similani at the time, had decided to take these prosecutors off. His reason for doing it was because he said you couldn't have Glenn Agliotti as a witness in one case against Jackie Selebi and then an accused in another case, and the same prosecuting team in both. He said that simply just didn't make sense. So he took the prosecuting team off and replaced them with a far inferior and unprepared, completely ill-prepared prosecuting team. And the argument from naysayers and critics was that he did this on purpose because he wanted the case to fail so that he could turn around to his predecessor, Vusi Piccoli, and also to the prosecutors, Harry Nell and Andrea Johnson, and say, you never should have been cutting these deals with the shooters. You never should have let them walk free completely without facing any kind of jail sentence or criminal record.